Good morning. Welcome to Faith for the Times, the YouTube version. My name is Jerry Aveta, and I have with me today two friends of mine that I'm so glad they're willing to participate with us in this, our inaugural session of a joint conversation. Dave Sandowich and Mike Pasquarello. And what I'd like to start off is Dave and Mike, just introduce yourselves, your professions, and just a short version of your journey of faith. And Dave, because you're the central figure here. Dave was the channel whom wish I met Mike. And so why don't you kick it off and just tell us about a little bit about yourself?
Sure, make it real short. Professional wise, I went into education, was a phys ed teacher and coach, and that led to school administration and leadership. And I finished out my professional career as a high school principal for 20 plus years. In that position, the school I worked in was culturally diverse, which I think is important because it really exposed me to that aspect of our society in that regard. Retired, but I continue to work in the state of New Jersey in as a consultant with the new leaders coming in to the profession, which I enjoy. So I still feel like I have my thumb kind of on the pulse of what's happening educational wise, not fully obviously, but and I still enjoy that. So that's kind of my professional journey. Personally, I grew up in the Christian faith, recognized my need for a savior as a young 11, 12, 13-year-old. It was pretty simple. I was lost. I needed to be found. It wasn't until my 30s that I really started to piece together what really cross and resurrection and Christianity was really about. And it was not about religion, it was about relationship. And I've that's theoretically 30 years ago. I'm in the 70s now, so that's 40 years of this kind of parsing that out, probing deeper into all that, and desiring to live life from that, as that being the hub, which would obviously parse out into the conversation we're about to have.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. I appreciate your testimony. Mike, go ahead.
I grew up in the church, came to faith at an early age, um, and professionally, I worked for three large institutions in my career. I served for 5 years in the United States Marine Corps. I was a commissioned officer. While I was in the Marine Corps, God called me to leave. And when my time was completed, my obligation was completed to return to school and prepare for pastoral ministry. I did that. I was ordained in the United Methodist Church and served for 18 years in full-time pastoral ministry. Towards the end of that time, I did a PhD in the history of Christianity and then went into teaching. And I've taught for the last 25 years in seminary settings and three different seminaries, evangelical seminaries here in the United States, preparing students for pastoral ministry. And I retired last summer, thankful for all I've been able to do. And now I'm serving as an interim pastor of a Methodist church in Kentucky and will be completed with that assignment this summer.
Quite impressive. I am humbled to have both you guys as part of this. The subject is faith in politics. As you know, I have a recent publication about the topic, and my publicist said that this is a very controversial subject. I said, yeah, I know. Yeah. But I think it's worthy of talking about. My goal is for us to, as men of faith, just talk about our views. In my opinion, there's no right or wrong view. It's our views, and it's based on our experiences, not only professionally, but our faith. So in that light, being an engineer and a math teacher, I got to start off a little bit of the numbers about the election, and particularly how people of faith voted and selected the candidates that were involved. And don't hold me to the numbers. You get on the internet, you can find all kinds of numbers, but I was trying to get an idea of the Christian vote, the people of faith, what was the percentages for the candidates and things like that. And using some approximation through different sources. One was the AP Votecast, which recorded all the data for the election. They said that Christian electorate was about 72% of the electorate. Now, what they define as electorate is uncertain. they said 56% of that was for President Trump. Just accepting those raw numbers, I just prorated that from the amount of votes, and it came to be about 62 million Christians voted for President Trump, and about 49 million other Christians uh, voted for another candidate. And I'll simply, I'm not saying those are the specific numbers, but I think they demonstrate the division in our nation, a political divide of particularly people of faith. With that in mind, I want to throw out a couple other numbers. Pew Research Center, they have the share of U.S. religious identity in our nation for Christians, going back as far as 2007, as 78%. Then in 2014, it dropped to 71%. Then I have a number from the Public Religion Research Institute in 2022, it dropping down to 67.3%. And the latest number from Pew in 23 is 63% Christian. All I'm trying to illustrate is how that number, regardless how it comes about, has been decreasing over the number of years. And my point of view is this toxic blend of faith and politics has helped that number shrink, in my opinion. I believe since politics became such an integral part in the faith community, or vice versa, I think that has helped the divide in our church. And my first question is, what do you guys think? What do you think about that? Do you agree with that? Do you think the current climate accelerates division? I'm just interested in your thoughts. So, Mike, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts about it. I've had for a long time. Let's start from the perspective of the Christian faith that we hold and the larger vision that it gives us in terms of God, the world, history, and where we're going. We believe what has been revealed to us, that the world is in God's hands. He made it for himself, and that he is providentially guiding it towards its good end and purpose, which is his. That means that we're not in charge of the world. We're not God. Now, modern ways of thinking have elevated the role we play in history, and a whole lot of things play into it, but it affects the way we approach politics. The politics then are no longer our civic participation in a common life by which we serve God in the world as God's world, but by which we take control of the world and that we can make it be what we believe it ought to be, or we can fix what's wrong with it. We can change it and make it better. Now, that sounds good and it sounds appealing. And today, people who go to churches hear that in sermons across the board. But it's idolatrous because it elevates ourselves to the place of God. And essentially, we're living once again the story of Adam and Eve and the tempter saying to them, you shall be like God. Okay. So for Christians now, this is not a matter of we want to do our civic duty and contribute and participate, but we want to join in the competition with everybody else to take charge and make things come out right, which essentially undercuts the faith we confess to hold. I'll stop there and let Dave go.
Yeah, no, it's a good foundation. I was going to throw numbers that came by my way in the previous election, 16, I believe. I forget the number, but it's large. Percentage of, quote, Christians did not vote because they wanted to make their point based on, at that point, Donald Trump was an unknown figure. And although they liked probably what he stood for, they were just unsure of him and his personality and all that. And they did not vote. And I think it was 42,000 or 62,000, something like that, the difference between win loss. And that came back then, and then bringing it up to 24, I think, based on Jerry's number, a lot of them voted as they didn't last time. So I just think that's an interesting social piece. I'm not sure there's a real spiritual twinge to that, because why people vote is another whole animal. I have to pause when we say people of faith and Christian. I mean, that's a broad topic, and in there are so many small segments of even the way that people see their faith and the way they live out their faith and how they connect that all to the current world scenario, or this national scenario in this case. There's just not one answer that's going to cover that whole topic. It's so intricate, personal. You go down south in our country, as Mike surely knows, it's a different animal than going to Rhode Island. It's a different part of the vibe of what Christianity does and how it affects, or even who cares um, around the nation in general. I'm not sure how to answer that question. I just think I don't know. Maybe you can let me throw this out there and see if you feel it's accurate or it's wrong. And Mike, you can maybe take this. I think traditionally there's been, whether churches stay out of politics or what civic stuff and separate it. But I mean, God created the family and that whole thing, and God ordained the church. If we want to look at it as concentric circles, and then there's the state, the national countries that God refers to, boundaries and what you said, God put this in, he's run the show. If we look at them as concentric circles, they can't operate separately. They have to connect some way. And with concentric circles, you can blend them so much they become one, or they can just touch each other where they need to touch each other. My point being, if that's an accurate description of where we are, and they're all ordained by God, and Romans, I think one of the verses you put out is Romans 13, I think, Jerry, that whole section.
Yes, Romans 13. Yep.
I mean, even that is worthy of some context correction, because I mean, the government that Paul was referring to was not a constitutional republic like we are now. So there's a little different twist on that. But I guess I'll just leave it with my point is, how can we not be involved with this? There has to be, if we're alive and well and functioning in a way that the order God set up, we have input and connections to this, call it politics or civic duty. But if it's swayed to what Mike has said, then it's not going to be as free flow. There's going to be some conflict if that's the case, because we're not seeing it as, I would say, as a believer, as my father sees it. I'll put it that way. So I don't think it's a great answer to that, but maybe someone can play off of that.
Well, no, I think you're both talking to the issue. It's difficult. The blend of faith, the blend of denominational faith, the blend of Christian faith, and the sheer numbers. And Mike, I agree with your point that God is sovereign, and both your points. God is sovereign in all this. And you'd hear some say, "I'm praying for this candidate," and it's God's will that this candidate won, and that is true. I believe that. I believe that He sets up authority and He takes down authority. So the results are the results, and I believe they all fall under the ordination of God. Springing on both your comments, quite often leading up to the election, I've heard quite often among Christians say something to the effect, people of faith saying something to the effect that, well, I'm voting for a platform as opposed to a person. Have you all heard that expressed before?
I've heard it said, I'm voting policy, not personality.
Here's my point of contention. I think in today's generation of politics, I think the platforms are more similar than dissimilar in terms of the governance of our country. In other words, you look at the way they execute policy and execute the budget and execute all the functions of the government. Year to year, there's very little difference in terms of dollars and cents. I was a federal employee, and so I'm more hypersensitive to that. I think for the most part, people of faith, it boils down to a view of what they call, and I hate this, liberal versus conservative. They label one vote as conservative and one vote as liberal, assigned to a political party. And my point is, in terms of governance, they're so similar, you can't really discriminate what's conservative and what's liberal when it comes to the financial management of our country. That's my opinion.
Jerry, can I speak to that? If I
Sure,
may?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's a good point. There's a sameness, underlying sameness. It doesn't really matter which party happens to be in power at any given time. There are, of course, differences. I understand there are differences. And yet, again, let's think about this from a Christian perspective. The structures of government, when they are corrupted by sin, are always going to promote themselves. and they're going to be driven by strong self-interest and self-preservation. Now, you can have a Republican flavor of that, and you can have a Democratic flavor of that. Politicians, it takes an incredible amount of character and strength and virtue for a politician to say no to just the overwhelming political momentum of that kind of self-preservation that we see in our political system. The founding fathers, while they didn't say this republic is Christian officially, they agreed that for it to function well, it would require a people formed by religion and virtue, all right, a certain kind of character. And that's broken down. I mean, it's pretty obvious. There's a consensus that, in our culture now that has simply broken down. And as a result, we're asking people to participate in a political system that they're really not formed to participate in well. And as a result, and one of my teachers used to say, we're all liberals now. Basically, we're looking out for ourselves, right? We're highly individualistic. We know what we want. We have our desires, and we look to the government to somehow be the umpire or the official officiating between everybody pursuing their own desires and to give us what we want. And so that's the way politicians talk. I have to satisfy this constituency and this constituency and this one and this one and this one. And I give them a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this. And that all contributes to this ongoing just self-interest, self-preservation that is larger than ourselves. The New Testament refers to that as principalities and powers. The early Christians understood well that they lived under the dark shadow of the Roman Empire and how powerful it could be and how it controlled their lives so much. And we Christians need to be realistic about that, not pessimistic. We don't need to give up, but this is why we have hope. We just celebrated that by saying Christ is risen and he is above all these powers, right? And so that we with clear minds and warm hearts can live our way through it and be a unique witness in the way that we go about it. Now, that's easier said than done. It's an ongoing struggle. And that's why we're talking today.
Very good, Mike. Dave, any thoughts?
Back to your, agree 100%. And again, I don't want to move out of the perspective of as a believer, because I think then we're just going to it has a potential of going all over the place and it'll become comparisons and all that. But there's a statement out there that I'm sure you've heard from several prominent people, and I've heard it from less prominent, is, the Democratic Party, I didn't leave them, they left me. That's been said several times. And I think my take on that is, I'm 70 years old now, and I am not a super political person. I don't thrive on this, every little detail about it, but I'm aware. And and this is not a radical statement, or I think it's been said often, is I think there was much more similarity back 30 years ago. I think we kind of agreed what we all wanted. We just disagreed on how we were the best way to get that. But I think that is very different now, personally. And I think that's whatever division there is. I think it's a logical division. I think there should be, because, again, to repeat myself, before you would say, yeah, that's what we prefer to have, but I think we should go about this way. No, I think we should go about this way. And then there would be some compromise, and ideally we would get there. Now the there is vastly different from my perspective. And being older, you can look back and see it. There is a separation. I wouldn't say it's the same anymore. And those forces that Mike talked about are loud from a perspective that I represent, which I believe is a godly perspective, hopefully.
I appreciate y'all's comments so much, because it reinforces what I believe, that there has been a migration, there has been a change in the way people thought and voted and believed in the governance of our country. And I think it began to change, at least in our lifetime, in the 80s, 90s, when politics started to migrate into the faith communities as part of the political discourse.
I want to agree with what Dave said. I think he said it well. The three of us are old enough to remember in our growing up years, what Dave said is true. There seemed to be a consensus among American people of a common good. We had a common history. Uh, there were some differences on how we thought the country should be governed and the direction it should go, but we were pretty much in overall agreement as to what that looked like in terms of the direction. I mean, just and where we had come from and where we were going. I don't think that common vision holds anymore at all. I think that's what's been fragmented, and with the polarization that we have. And now you have individuals and individual groups of people who've determined what their own vision of what America should be. And this fierce push and pull, as you are trying to say and leading this conversation, many Christians have decided to just jump in the competition, in the push and pull, and have got drawn into it and are playing basically on the terms that the world gives rather than what Dave is talking about, doing it as Christian people.
Yes, exactly. I think we've gotten to this place, we as a nation, as a country that's migrated to our respective corners of belief, I believe because of the facilitation of faith into politics, and at that advent, and I can remember being in the church, and I can remember members of the moral majority coming to my church, and I can remember making social issues the driving function of our political positions, and I think that's where we are today. I think, in a lot of people of faith, it's not an objective decision about how who's the best leader, who's the best governor, who's the best capable person to be our leader in terms of experience and knowledge and understanding how the government runs. It's really seems to be dominated on who emphasizes the social programs the best or the most effectively. And when I say social programs, we're talking mainly back in the 80s, it was the abortion, and now gun control, and now gay rights is the other thing. And so I think those things have dominated the thought process, the political process, the emphasis on those issues is, again, my opinion, in the faith community, drive the overall understanding and the overall selection of who I'm going to support in running my country. So my question is, how do a people of faith, how do we discriminate over that push and pull, as Mike, you said, pulling to the moral side of our faith, pulling through what we know, what scripture says as far as certain things and what we believe, but balancing that with what is reasonable and what is the really best choice as a governor of a person who can manage the complexity of our nation. How do we balance that? I know we don't have the answers, but I at least like to hear your guys' attempt to at least, how do we reconcile that push and pull? How should we approach it, I guess, is my question.
Me personally, I'm not expecting for, I don't think you're advocating for, or it'd be nice if everybody just got along and there was just no controversy, no tension, and everybody could accept everybody's other ideas. Well, I just don't think that's reality. It was never reality in my workplace. We had to work with people who differed in the direction I wanted to take the school in 5 years. There's a strong resistance to that I had to deal with, acknowledge, devise leadership to work with that at the same time. My personal thing is I need to avoid the temptation as me as a new creation in Christ to have my identity based on being on the right side, being on the wrong side, getting sucked back into that where I can just feel free to say, well, I just don't agree with that. Not worrying about them not liking me. That's just where I want to be personally in this. Just from a Christian perspective, Jesus said, because of who I am and what I believe in and where I'm going, they're going to hate you. Now could be on the spiritual level too, but as Christians, we're going to be a thorn in people's side. you know. But there's got to be a mix of a beautiful agape love mixed in there. But the reality is, a lot of things Jesus stood for and his kingdom's about are contrary to what Mike was talking about earlier in that thing. So I'm not shooting for everybody to get along.
Yeah.
My challenge personally is to feel the freedom of being in Christ and the joy of living in this planet amongst that tension that will always be there. And unfortunately, right now, it's worse than it ever was. Will that get better? I don't know. I don't know, Mike, if you want to add on to that.
Well, let me say I want to agree with you in what you said, that the freedom we have in Christ, right, the truth that will set us free in Jesus Christ, the freedom of the Spirit, means that we can enter into these things with others, clearly understanding that, well, no, we're not always going to agree, and that God has made us that way, and that with respectful, right, respectful give and take with a common goal in mind, we may be able to move forward and get some good things done. There's give and take in that. And like you said, Dave, if our whole identity is wrapped up in being right always or getting our way always, then we're going to go at it in a way that's not going to in any way contribute to arriving at a consensus or a mutual agreement. But this is where we are now: knock down, drag out, just fight it out. Who can get the most votes? Who can get the most control? Who can get laws to make other people do what we want them to do? And that's it. That's simply a matter of how we get things done now, which is why Christians who act like Christians are going to be kind of odd and strange, in the process. I mean, there's a freedom in which we can say, well, yeah, but you know what? It really is only politics, and let's be realistic about what we're trying to do. One of my teachers used to say that one of the main problems that's happened with Christians in America is we've decided that America is our real church and politics is our liturgy, and that's the way we go at it. So we have elevated politics to a level that's kind of given it a sense of transcendence that it doesn't deserve. Or like you said, Dave, your job is principle elevated, and your identity in it to the level of transcendence, that somehow you're absolutely right always. And you go at it that way. And then the people who disagree with you then are no longer colleagues in the process, but they're your enemies. And you
Hmm.
have to treat them like that. And that's what we're living in, as you said, right now. And it's pretty dark. It's very dark.
I agree with both you guys wholeheartedly, but we all know um, having that type of conversation is more difficult than it appears. I think part of that is because there is a dimension of Christianity, and Mike, you and I have talked a little bit about this, and I'd like us to talk about it at some point down the road. That perspective of Christian nationalism has crept in a very strong way into a large segment of people of faith. And if you believe what I read, it's very close to the current administration as well. And so that in itself, and again, I don't want to get off on that trail, but there's a philosophy where some people of faith, it's my way of faith or the highway. You know what I'm trying to say? There's almost in some people of faith, I believe there is no ground for compromise. People don't want to talk about politics. And I think that's the solution is we have to talk about it. Do you agree? And if we have to talk about it, how do we start the conversation and diffuse it when it gets emotional? Did we lose you, Mike? Oh no.
Something you said, Jerry.
Well, let me
Yeah.
finish my thought here
Okay,
first.
go ahead. Go. Oh, he's with me. That that was helpful.